This is Lansing Online News Radio, LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7, here in Lansing, Michigan, on a nice and post-Thanksgiving evening. Good to see you, Bill. I see you survived Turkey Day intact.
Yes, drove 7 hours, but it was fun. Over the hill and through the dale or something.
Ah, well, this is the first time in probably 40 or 50 years that I haven't been the one to cook the family turkey.
And you don't eat turkey.
Well, but as vegetarians, I make turkey anyhow.
Okay.
You know, it's one of those. It's the one time a year that you can't be vegetarian. I think there's a law somewhere. Even Al Gore probably not vegan on that day. But I did spend most of my weekend shooting lots of pictures of dogs.
I saw many of them online.
No kidding. Yeah, what do I think altogether I posted something like 70 pictures of dogs, different kinds of dogs from the dog show. And I hate to tell you, there are more dog photos on my hard drive than that.
It's an amazing array of sizes.
And very little duplicates. I mean, there are so many different breeds nowadays, and they're so unique, and it really is a lot of fun. The MSU Pavilion every Thanksgiving weekend has this Ingham County Kennel Club dog show, and then on the Friday before, they have a couple clubs from elsewhere in the state that come in. So you see this incredible array of dogs. I mean, we're talking from the little Chihuahuas to the Great Danes, and it's just so much fun to go around there and watch them prep them and get them ready for showing. It's a lot of fun, and I would think it'd be a great place to bring kids.
And is it free?
It's free on Friday, and then there's a modest fee on Saturday and Sunday. And they're going to be having an obedience and breed show at MSU on Saturday. On the 5th of January, 4th or 5th, you'll have to check the MSU events calendar for the pavilion. They're going to be having a puppy show back out there, so I'll be back out there with my cameras for the puppy show. But boy, it's a lot of fun.
Throughout the year, MSU Pavilion out there has an array of different kinds of creatures, don't they?
Llama Fest is one of my favorites.
Llama Fest and goats and everything else.
Yes, yes. Then there's Small Animal Day, which is just amazing. I mean, people bring boatloads of kids out there, and they just get a chance to pet everything. It's really, I mean, it's a great facility to have. I was back working at Michigan Farmer many years ago when they wanted to build that facility, and it wasn't that easy to get it built, and it was because we did have a livestock pavilion right there on Shaw Lane, and but it was way too small for these kinds of events.
And it was all dirt.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
wasn't a very pleasant place to be in.
No, it was great for rodeo though.
Yeah.
They do have that sort of dirt arena on the other side. That's where they did the agility stuff with the dogs. I didn't get a chance to go over
Jumps and things like that.
Oh, those dogs do amazing things. So it was a lot of fun. Now you have one event coming up with an author coming in.
Right, Jodi Picoult, who's a major New York Times best-selling author. I have to admit that I have not read one of her books, but I have read one of her.
And you've read everything.
Well, not her. I have read some of her short stories.
You'd prefer backs of soup cans? You'd read those?
Yes, I prefer Jim Harrison.
Well,
but she is an amazingly popular author, and I think the audience size will tell you that. They have sold nearly 900 tickets to see her.
And you said they're not cheap.
They're $20 for lunch and $30 to listen to her.
Wow.
So I expect anybody that buys lunch is going to listen to her.
I would assume.
Otherwise, why? You know, there'll be some that won't buy lunch, but not many. And there's about 50 tickets still available. And the way to learn
now,
about
where is she speaking?
She is speaking at Monday at 11, Monday the 9th at 11 o'clock at the Best Western Plus Hotel on South Cedar. And it's a part of the Town Hall series.
And they can house 900?
Oh, it's big. It's huge. They have a huge banquet hall.
Wow. I've done workshops in there. I guess you could.
Yeah, it's big. The only way that I can tell you to find out about it is to Google Lansing Town Hall series, because there's no information anywhere else out there.
Really?
And they'll give you a phone number to call on there.
Wow, that's amazing.
But they obviously have a very dedicated group of followers that love Jodi Picoult.
Now give an example of some of the titles in her genre.
I can't even the titles I've forgotten, but her genre is typically women get involved in very difficult situations that involve race, religion, sex, the Holocaust. So they're put into situations like that.
Women in danger.
Yeah, danger, both psychological and physical.
But bestseller pop fiction.
Big time bestseller. But the reason I put something in the Pulse about it was her most recent book is not a book, it's a short story that was posted only online.
Yeah, you said what it was
it's
like
$1.99
$1.99
through Amazon.com.
But it's like huge sales.
Oh, it'll probably sell $250,000.
Oh, good grief.
Yeah,
Well,
that's $500,000 in our. Yeah, that's a lot of money.
it
And
sure
she'll get at least half of it.
Wow, I'm amazed.
So she's spread her wings. She probably sells half her books are ebooks.
Amazing. So that's coming up on next Monday,
Next Monday,
11 o'clock,
11
and
o'clock.
there's only a few tickets left, so
About
people,
50 tickets.
yeah.
If people are interested, they need to go online and Google Lansing Town Hall series.
Wow. Well, I've not read anything by her as well, but I don't know. Maybe I should get one of those books delivered by drone.
Yeah, on a Sunday.
Can I ask something? What, do they have to come straight over your house and then plunge down so they don't hit
The
people?
guy that delivers mine now appears to do that.
I see. Well, there's this, like the bad paperboy stories.
You know, I think you know this, that Amazon employs other than the postal service to deliver books in town.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
They've got some services, and this guy delivers a couple hundred packages a day, and he just whips them. I mean,
I have
moves.
a sprinter man who comes to my house because you and I are both Amazon Prime members, right? Because we like that free, I mean, that's why I don't shop anywhere else
It's
anymore.
called an addiction.
It is. I go online, get everything, toothpaste, what the hell. They'll bring it to me for free.
Free.
So, I mean, this guy is written up to my door like 4 times a week, and he is speedy.
Yeah.
They must, I mean, I guess they get to go home as soon as they get done, so it's up to them how
I've
fast.
seen him with he has a car, and it is filled to the very top with packages.
Wow.
And he moves. This guy moves. So
But they're going to put these people out of business if they go with these drones.
how can you deliver anything with a drone?
Well, it doesn't make sense to me
I think
in reality.
I think that they made up. I mean, some of the things Amazon does is pretty obscure, but I think they made that up.
Have they noticed Michigan weather? I mean, can you see bunches of drones going out in neighborhoods in the middle of these ice storms and all the rest of this? It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me.
No.
I assume that what the decision made long ago by corporate America was that humans were cheap, right? But not cheap enough. If you could find a way to do it with a bolt and a rubber belt, you would do it that way,
Yeah.
and they've switched to that. So I mean, getting rid of human jobs seems to be, they're willing to do almost anything to get rid of humans.
I wonder if the U.S. Postal Service will have drones going door to door. That should be a real interesting.
What, are we going to have fighting drones? I mean, can you have that many drones buzzing around a city?
No, I don't think you can have any drones buzzing around the city.
It's coming.
Yeah.
We actually have a course in journalism now, drone journalism. The Knight Center for Environmental Journalism has a course where they teach you how to put cameras on drones and go out and gather information. And it's actually pretty cool for aerial photography.
Sure, if you're doing things like covering a flood or something
It's wonderful.
where people can't go.
I have a hero camera that I've never spent enough time with. It's those wonderful little GoPros.
Oh, yes.
And they're just fabulous. They do really remarkable stuff. So you can slap one of those on a drone. For about $700, you can get a decent rig that can go up and do things like map farmland, show you how your crops are doing, do all kinds of reporting, really, from the air. So it's an interesting new phenomenon.
I think it needs to be licensed.
Well, don't you think it's going to get pretty crowded? I mean,
When you get around $700, I don't think, for example, you could fly near my house because I live near the airport.
well, that's the other thing I wondered about. Yeah, it would seem to me that would be.
I have a hunch I'd get a visit. I think if you had a kite high in the air, they'd come visit you.
Yeah.
We're pretty much sometimes in the flight pattern.
We're going to have to figure out this drone at Europe.
I think you should put a GoPro on your dog.
Oh, God, my little chihuahua, yeah. He's busy digging in the hoop house these days. Apparently, as it gets cold, little critters move into the hoop house, little meadow mice and so forth, and nest in there. So the little dog just goes bananas when he hits the inside of the hoop house. So it'd be fun to put a little GoPro camera on his chest and watch where he goes. That'll be next. Well, changing gears, we do have some discussion of an upcoming documentary film. We're joined by Valerie Marvin, the president of the Greater
Historical Society of Greater Lansing.
I always get that one wrong. Yes, they're going to have to. I just need to write it down. That's what it would take. But she's going to talk to us. There is a PBS movie coming up tonight. We're going to explore a lot of the themes about unionization. We'll later be joined, or in this discussion as well, be joined by Jim Hughes of the UAW.
Tim Hughes.
Tim Hughes of the UAW. It's going to be that kind of night. And we're going to be talking about the Calumet mining. There's a film coming out about the Calumet mining strike and the later disaster that occurred at the Italian Hall. And that's coming up on PBS. Is it going to be on, is it Michigan PBS or is it national PBS? What series will this be part of?
It's national, actually. If you Google the Red Metal documentary, which is what it's called, is Red Metal, You will see PBS stations, Birmingham, Alabama, places in California. It's been picked up by PBS stations across the country that will be showing it.
But it's not like part of POV or one of those where it will be beamed nationwide all at one time.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
No, they had to designate to pick it up. I think it's an optional thing.
Okay. So it's going to be here, airing when here?
Next Monday, we are going to be doing an early premiere. There are different locations across the state that will be doing this leading up to the showing on PBS. And the Capital Area District Library and the Historical Society of Greater Lansing got together and decided we were going to do a premiere right here in Lansing at the downtown library on Capitol Avenue.
And that will be at what time?
That will be at 6:30.
Okay.
And that'll be on Monday evening. That's the 9th.
That's a 54-minute film.
It is a 54-minute documentary, and then the author of the book this is based on, his name's Steve Lato, I believe it's pronounced. He wrote a book called Death's Door, which is specifically about the Italian Hall disaster and its relationship to the copper strike, and he will be there actually after the film to field questions.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Because he served as one of the main historical advisors for the film, and he has really made ripples in the history community and throughout the UP in regard to this disaster that took place 100 years ago. It just shows you how powerful history is that 100 years later, people still get very upset when local legends and traditions are questioned, and in some cases perhaps proven to be untrue.
Was one of the big issues which way the doors opened? Was that the...
Yes.
And the
Yes.
previous historical markers said that they were crushed because the doors opened inward.
To the inside, inward,
Right.
yes.
And
And
Steve
84
discovered
people
the,
were killed in this. It was a stampede,
It
wasn't it?
depends on how many people, it depends on which source you believe. Some say 73, some say 74.
Oh, 74. Okay.
There was one person that was taken to the hospital afterwards, died a couple days later, and she doesn't appear on all of the casualty lists. But it is considered to be the greatest unsolved mass murder in Michigan history. And a lot of it is the discussion over the doors. And the point that he makes in his book is no one said anything about the doors until the 1950s. It took 40 years for this to start to really appear. And there's actually evidence that he finds that when the building was built in 1908, so just a few years before the disaster, it specifically talks in a newspaper article about the construction of the building of how to meet the new fire codes that are being put in place. It has doors that swing out. Now there were two sets of doors, so there's still discussion about did they both swing out, did one swing in, but his point was if nobody said anything about this, if this never came up during the inquest, during the congressional hearing that they had, if the doors would have been one of the main contributors to the disaster, they would have discussed it.
Well, we have a 5th floor on a building in East Lansing that was authorized for 4. And I mean, things happen where they don't come into code the way they were supposed to. It certainly becomes an important issue of contention later. Were there any photographs taken?
There are several photos in here. The photo that he put on the front cover is a wider angle than what you see in most photos of the doors, and you can see actually the edge of the building here, and you can see the doors are hinged to come out.
Interesting.
so what that means is someone held the doors closed.
Yeah, so they were barred somehow.
Well, that's one theory.
Yes.
The other thing is if you've read about stampedes, which is basically what this was, the story is that someone walked into this hall full of hundreds of people, mostly children, having a Christmas party on Christmas Eve in 1913. The story is that a man walked in and yelled fire, and there was a rush for the door. They were on the 2nd story. They had to get down the stairs, and the theory is that as they were going down the stairs, which were quite steep, people fell and they just piled up.
Yeah.
Now, some people say, yes, the doors were held. In fact, the Woody Guthrie song that was written about this talks about those nasty guys down there holding the doors closed. There are other instances, though, of stampedes where you have perfectly open doors, and it's just once those first few people fall, it piles up.
Well, look at what happened with the White Lion situation,
Yes.
where we saw the pyrotechnics catch the ceiling on fire, and it was the piling up of the bodies that made it impossible for others to get out.
I actually Googled this earlier today just for fun, human stampede, and came up with all
You sure know how to spend a fun Monday.
came up with all kinds of recent events where this is still happening.
Yeah, it still happens.
It's actually a huge problem. during the Hajj, when
Yes,
Muslims will go
yes,
on their Hajj pilgrimage because
yeah.
they have such huge crowds. There's one point of the Hajj where you are throwing stones at the devil, and it used to be just these pillars you were throwing at. They've actually built a wall now to do this part of the pilgrimage because there were so many people that were being crushed because the crowds were so tight.
Uh, there's a reason I don't go into crowds. It's not just paranoia, it's because people can get hurt in them. And there is that stampede. We've seen it at rock concerts, we've seen it in all kinds of places.
Sporting events,
Oh,
soccer,
In this
football.
case, it took place against the backdrop of all of this union tension, so that's
yes.
another issue. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Valerie Marvin of the Historical Society of Greater Lansing about the Italian Hall disaster and its relationship to the Calumet mine. That copper mine was in the middle of a strike, and so there were all of these tensions. The theory was that the person who yelled fire, because you're saying it was a mass murder, that person did this in order to cause chaos. And it was against the backdrop of the strike that somehow they think it was somebody who was trying to cause chaos or trying to break the strike.
The strike had been going on for several months at this point. The main company that owned the largest mines that were striking, there were multiple, was the Calumet and Hecla company, which was one of the biggest in the Keweenaw Peninsula. Very, very powerful. Their headquarters was actually in Boston. And so there's all kinds of communication going back and forth every day. The company managed to weasel their way into the local papers, and there were several crimes that took place before this. There were a couple boarding houses that were attacked, people were shot. There were mass parades and demonstrations where the people who were protesting, who were showing support for the strike, would be attacked. There was no middle ground here. You were with the mines or you were with the union. And the tensions had built up so over months that there had been a few casualties, but this just exploded, and it brought national attention to the strike. And what's interesting is that the workers never received recognition of their union as they wanted. But if you look within a couple years, there's actually action being taken by the federal government to give unions more rights, more abilities to work with companies.
The mining workers were at the
And
forefront of that movement
yes,
for many years.
and it's thought that this case, because it received national attention because of this disaster, it's thought that this particular strike actually really helped contribute to that movement.
Was it because was there an underlying ethnic issue with, I mean, if this was the Italian Hall, many of the workers were probably ethnic people who had come to that region in
There
order to be
were,
miners. Was that part of the dynamic, that
yes, yes,
the underlying tensions in town?
yes.
So the assumption was that somebody did this in order to cause chaos? Are we sure that they had murder in mind, or were they just trying to frighten people?
That depends on who you ask.
Okay.
Um, the argument in the book is presented that probably the person who walked in and said this was probably associated with the mine. Many of the witnesses say he was wearing a Citizens Alliance button, which was a pro-mine group in the community, and they were supposed to wear these buttons at all times to show their allegiance. But the thought was that what probably happened was they simply wanted to disrupt the party. There were all these workers who had come together. It was supposed to be a party for children, honestly. The fear was that these families were barely scraping by, and Big Annie, who was one of the main organizers really at the forefront of the strike, got together a lot of the women and said, let's collect what money we can. They went, they bought candy, they bought mittens, little tiny gifts, with the idea that a lot of these kids wouldn't have had a Christmas otherwise. And so the thought is that, possibly it was somebody who had a few too many drinks at the saloon downstairs and decided to go up and cause some chaos. Now that's one end. The other end of the spectrum says this was deliberate, the doors were barred, this was intentionally murder.
Mm.
And you have the full gamut from one end to the other in the community still today. Now, the people who were alive in 1913, of course, at this point, who remember this, have pretty much passed away.
We know the murderer is not alive, so
Right.
I mean, we can solve the crime without having to have that level of proof.
But there are families that have passed down stories
Oh,
about
I
this
would bet.
because some families lost, parents, multiple children. There was one child that both parents were killed, and a little baby girl was left. She was adopted by another family in the area. But families have very strong traditions about this. They have very deeply held convictions, and it is extraordinarily controversial to this day.
I'd like to bring Tim into the conversation. If I could get you to be a little closer. We are webcasting at the same time, Lansing Online News, if people want. Tim, that is part of the really sad history of the union movement in Michigan. It really was at the forefront of creating unions in the United States, both because of mining and also because of the automobile industry here. It was certainly played a pivotal role. Did that disaster, is that part of the history of the union movement here? I think it,
Oh, sure.
when we think about that, when I see things like right to work that has come in now to Michigan, it seems that it sort of defies all that history where people literally paid with their lives for this movement in this state.
It's particularly true in mining communities because frequently they were in very rural, less populated areas, and they were company towns. So some of the things you were talking about, Valerie, where somebody would get attacked in the street, it wasn't very likely that the police were going to follow up on it. So it was just, there was a real siege mentality. And it is still very fresh in people's mind. You can walk down the street to the AFL-CIO building. They've got a brick from the Italian Hall with a plaque underneath it.
Really?
Years ago, I worked for the AFL-CIO. I went up there for a tour of the Upper Peninsula, different work sites, and happened to be in town when the students from, I think it was the National Mine School, were putting on a multimedia production about the Italian Hall massacre. And the children were dressed up as the miners and the mine owners, and in the background they had pictures, slides being projected of the actual miners, and the parents in the audience were seeing, their children on the stage and their parents and grandparents on the wall behind them, and boy, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. People were just yelling out during the performance. They won a national prize for school drama productions, but it was a very raw nerve, 67 years later.
Did the mine owners live in the same community, or were the mine supervisors there? Who were the people that were on the other side taking the brunt of the heat from the mining community? Because there had to have been a real tension in town.
Yeah, they tended to live in the big houses on top of the hill.
Yeah. Oh, I'm surprised.
Some things don't change.
They went to see Caruso.
Uh-huh.
Did the Pinkertons get involved in this strike?
Yes, the Pinkertons were involved. What got more attention, though, than the Pinkertons was the fact that the National Guard was called out. They approached Governor Ferris about having the National Guard come up. And this was actually in the summer when they initially came. The Guard was supposed to be training anyway. And so they shipped them all up on trains. And when they got there, there was some question as to, is all of this necessary? Because the mines wanted to bring in lots of extra security. Now, later they would bring in scab workers from other places, and there was very much an ethnic divide. And this is one of the issues with the disaster and with the strike, is you have communities of miners who speak completely different languages, have completely different culture. You have largely a Finnish group, which Finnish is a terrible language to learn, from what I've heard, very difficult. You have Germans, you have Slovakians, you have Canadians, and even within the mine hierarchy, there was a language divide because most of the bosses, most of the overseers in the mines were of English and Cornish backgrounds, and so they spoke English. So you had that English speaking versus other
everything
dynamic.
Language, culture,
Absolutely.
religion.
And something that comes up in the testimony is that when this person came in and yelled fire, well, there were some people who didn't even know what he was yelling because some of them didn't understand enough English to be able to know what was going on. And ironically, some of those people survived because they didn't hear fire, they didn't rush forward. They were just in a noisy room and things were chaotic and they're going, what's going on?
Wow.
So they lived to tell the story.
Mm.
You were also mentioning the earlier talking about drones and photos and so on. This is actually a very well photographed tragedy. This surprised me as I was reading more about it. There are photos upon photos of the corpses, of the Italian Hall afterwards, of the funeral procession, of the mass burial. Over 50 of the victims were buried in one day, actually. They had hearses coming in, they had coffins coming in from miles and miles across the UP. And They actually would dig these giant trenches. There was one on the Protestant side of the cemetery, one on the Catholic side, and they would just line the graves up. And there are photos of all of this.
Oh.
And the book also references the fact that there was someone there who actually brought a very rudimentary movie camera and was taking film. And I'm so curious to see if any of that film is known to survive and if it made it into this documentary. I don't know the answer to that question.
We'll see Monday night.
We will.
Well, Tim, what were the issues? Was it safety, wages, all of the above? What were the main issues that caused the strike?
All of the above.
All of
I
the
mean,
above.
Typically, they tried to get people to work as cheaply as they could, and they would try to get, particularly when you had a multinational workforce, it was easy to kind of divide and conquer and say, well, you work over here, this is the good place, and those, dumb Italians, we'll put them over there. And so it was tough to get solidarity among the workers when they were all speaking different language. But ultimately, the one language they understood is they're all getting screwed. Nobody had any money.
That does seem to be universal.
Yeah.
That will bring people together. But you were seeing it nowadays as well, as people are beginning to realize. I think many people thought those were battles of the past.
Yeah, well, you can walk by a Walmart and see a different version of the same battle being fought today. It's about whether or not you have enough money to feed your kids and make the house payment and things like that. It's pretty basic.
Now, did those families stay in the area? I mean,
some of them. A lot of families left long before the disaster because the mines had been closed for months at this point. A lot of them simply picked up and said, I have to go find someplace else. In some instances, though, you do see the men leaving to work other places, and the families are still allowed to stay there. And that was something that I found very interesting and don't completely understand is how this worked with company housing, because the company owned your home that you lived in, and there were conditions as to when you could live and when you couldn't. Apparently, though, there was some sort of law in the books, and I don't know if this was national or state, that said in a strike situation like this, they could not kick you out. And it sounds like this is new policy that had just come in a little before.
Although, in that situation, they expected those workers to ultimately go back to work, so they may have, you're not, it's probably unclear. I can't imagine there was a whole bunch of legislation that had passed by 1913. That was fairly early in the movement when workers really didn't have much in the way of rights. Tim, one of the things that has interested me in a lot of the discussions about Obamacare recently is the idea that their union movements have been different in different countries, and they sort of take the shape of the culture that they're in. And it seems to me that the union movement in the United States has been more beleaguered than almost any other country other than maybe a banana republic here and there. I mean, they're, down in Central and South America, it's not unusual that union workers disappear and unions never get formed. But here, it seems to me that we really have not been able to secure union rights in the same way that the Canadians have, the Europeans have. What happened in our history that made that harder to do?
I think part of it is there's a sense among a lot of Americans that they want to be upwardly mobile, and that maybe they're working in a factory today, but tomorrow they're going to own the factory. And that's, a positive thought, but sometimes it denies reality that, you're likely going to be working in this place for a long time, and you better start negotiating for a pension and trying to get some job safety so you can, make it safely through the workday. So that's part of it. And there's frankly a lot of people with money that spend a lot of time trying to form opinion against the labor movement and collective bargaining. If you just go up the road to Midland and look at the Mackinac Center, it's founded by business owners. They put tons of money into it. I've actually was up there once and appeared on one of their TV shows. They didn't know who they were booking and were a little bit chagrined when they found out who showed up. My sense is they burned the tape right afterwards.
But it never saw the light of day?
It was a beautiful facility.
I'll bet it
was
is.
Just gorgeous. And so they've got a lot of money. They've got a lot of staff. And, just think of how many times you've seen the phrase Mackinac Center of some op-ed piece. They're not very subtle. They're spending, and right now there's ads running in Michigan for about a 2-week period about how wonderful Right to Work is working.
Oh yeah, it's been their salvation, hasn't it?
There is some lawsuits brewing with Mackinac Center because they have taken sides on issues, and somebody's challenging their nonprofit status, isn't it?
Yeah, essentially they're lobbying.
Yeah.
Because they hire a lot of former Republican staff members to come work for them, and they'll show up at legislative committees as so-called experts. The committee chairs will bring them in for that, but they're there to change opinion and lobby just as when I go in there and say they're full of baloney.
Well, it seemed to me that there was a strategic decision made on the part of the right that they had a lot of money and they were going to invest in what they perceived as think tanks. They hired academics to put a sort of research gloss on things. They issue white papers. They do a lot of studies that then journalists pick up and report as gospel that are looking at economic trends and so forth. And what the left tended to do with the handful of rich philanthropists who were willing to underwrite them was they tried to do more community-based programming, where they would try to put in a soup kitchen here or an educational after-school program there. And it didn't seem to me that they engaged in the dialogue to the same degree. That, I mean, it seems to me that in that sort of culture war, the Heritage Foundation, the Mackinac Center, all of these different right-wing think tanks really got a jump on the union movement, and they shaped the argument as one that, these are just freeloaders. They're the ones who are, they want to keep that conductor on the back of the train even when they don't need the conductor anymore, although maybe in New York they wish they'd have had one in front of the train the other day. I mean, that was kind of the line that happened. If you could go back to union history, what were some of the pivotal points that made a difference in how well unions were able to entrench themselves in this country?
Well, a lot of the big turnaround happened under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and creation of legislation that allowed for organizing and for collective bargaining, set some ground rules so you didn't have to, have warfare in the streets of Calumet. You could, go to the bargaining table, go to court, file a complaint with the NLRB, things like that. And it worked pretty well for decades. But in recent years, you've seen a plan from a lot of the corporate entities saying, well, that may be the way the law is in the United States, but we don't have to build cars here. We can go down to Mexico and build them, where I went down on a trip down there and we went around to look at different factories with the police following us around. And we came to one abandoned factory and there's a bunch of guys on the loading dock with machine guns. And kind of ducked back and said, who's that? I said, well, that's the workers. I said, what are they doing? They says, well, they're trying to collect their unemployment insurance in your terms. And I said, how does that work? And he goes, well, if they occupy the factory long enough, they can sell off what's inside and get some money to live on. But if the police come in, if they fall asleep, they'll take the guns away and throw them in jail. Totally different world down there.
Yeah.
So
one of the things that you brought up is the organization that's going on to kind of rile unions right now, but that occurred back in the early 1900s. There was an organized national effort, wasn't there, Ben?
Right.
It goes back into the late 19th century, actually. If you look in the 1870s and the 1880s, again, a lot of it's in mines is where it starts in America. But there are efforts to organize in that period. I was doing some research several years ago on the construction of the Colorado State Capitol, which was designed by the same architect as our Capitol, Elijah Myers. And they're interviewing him in a newspaper article in the 1880s how he feels about the labor disputes that are going on in Colorado and if he thinks this is going to impact building trades as well.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Tim Hughes of the UAW and with Valerie Marvin of the Historical Society about the union movement in Michigan. And one of the things, you can't outsource a mine, but you can sure sign a NAFTA agreement and get rid of all the auto jobs, which dramatically changed Michigan. And it's made the union less powerful here just simply because the number of union members has dwindled. When I was in high school, it was 35% of working people belonged to some kind of union. And that has, dwindled down now to the point where the manufacturing jobs are gone so much that it's the public sector jobs that are actually the largest unionized workforce. And that they don't come out of that same tradition, it seems to me. Not the sit-down strike in Flint and that sort of thing. They're more like the PATCO people that Reagan went after. Reagan decided that, with the PATCO strike, that seemed to me the major bellwether in this country was the election of Reagan, and union membership went on a severe decline ever since then as a result of sort of what I would consider union-busting tactics. I was shocked. I had a friend whose husband was one of the air traffic controllers let go, and he had never expected that to happen. I mean, I think it was stunning. And have we simply never had a Supreme Court that would have backed the union?
Oh, there's been times when things have been upheld. I'd hate to take a case like that. In fact, there's a couple of cases pending before the U.S. Supreme Court now that could have some severe repercussions on how you can organize. One thing you mentioned about how different countries approach the idea of collective bargaining, you can see it with Volkswagen now down in the South. Well, we've been trying to organize auto factories down there for some time, and we're fighting with Datsun and Nissan and some of those companies. But in Volkswagen, it's part of their corporate philosophy that they want to involve the workers more in how their jobs are done. And they've been working with the UAW to try and create this works council, which is kind of a hybrid of a union, but it involves workers sitting at the table with their supervisors and trying to figure out how to get things done.
Sounds like communism to me.
Well, that's pretty much, if you look at, at the Republican senators down there, that's what they're bad mouthing the company.
I'm sure
that
they are.
gave millions of dollars to get to set up shop there with tax incentives. Now they're bad mouthing them because they're not demonizing the UAW. There's been a kind of cultivated a knee-jerk anti-union philosophy in this country for a while. Part of it is even trying to have class warfare. There was an old railroad baron, I'm forgetting his name, who said, "I can hire one half of the working class to kill the other half."
Ah, yes. Yeah.
It's a little more subtle version of that, but it's like, well, the reason you pay so much for that car is because these lazy guys get all this health insurance and pensions.
Right. Cars are so cheap now
But
that
if you
they're
talk to
being
people,
made
say,
elsewhere.
"Well, would you like health insurance and pensions?" They say, "Well, yeah,
Oh,
that would be
yeah, that
nice."
would be a nice thing to have. Yeah. One of the things that I've also noticed is that one of the arguments made that is critical of the American union movement compared to, say, the Canadians was that the Canadian union movement went for things like universal health care. They fought very hard for universal health care for everyone, whereas the American union movement fought very hard to get great benefits for its own workers, but was not necessarily as engaged in a broader conversation about how everyone should have that. They thought maybe if they were the example, others would follow and join the unions. It seems to me now, though, that with things like the Walmart strikes that we're seeing, that are they're sort of quasi strikes, they're protests, they're uninteresting. We're now seeing unions backing groups that are not necessarily part of their membership. They seem to be taking a broader focus. Is that a shift in philosophy?
I think it's an expansion where
Okay.
people are trying to build coalitions where they can. You can see, the unions forming coalitions with, environmental groups and others. There's the Blue-Green Alliance.
Yeah.
This features environmentalists and the steelworkers. There's a lot of commonality in interest there, but there's also the potential political strength as well. If labor tries to go it alone, it's a hard thing to win elections. But if you're working in conjunction with other people that have been getting the short end of the stick, you've got a better chance of building a winning coalition.
Well, one of the things that, and I think it probably started with the miners, was job safety. Job safety has always been important to unions, and they got laws in effect that covered this nationally. But mines were always one of the most dangerous places. Well, they still are one of the most dangerous places to work.
And now you're paid just as badly as you were maybe 100 years ago. I was shocked at how little money. You remember when we had our most recent mine disaster a few years ago? I was shocked. There were people working for $8, $12 an hour in mines. That's horrific work. That's really difficult work. And so little money. What happened to the wages? Why have the wages? Is it the contracts? It's just impossible to get a good contract anymore?
It's difficult because it's difficult to win a strike anymore. And we finally have a National Labor Relations Board that isn't slanted against the labor movement. But that's just in the last couple of months. It's been a difficult thing to go on strike and have any reasonable expectation of coming out ahead.
I know that in the past, too, one of the things that's worried me, I see the business section in all the newspapers, and I say, so where's the labor section? Where's the worker section? It seems to me that what we have is a sort of middle-class media nowadays. They're mostly college-educated suburban kids who don't come out of that tradition. And it's hard, it seems to me, to find out news about the labor movement. Has the internet helped in organizing? Are you finding that you don't have the kind of resources that you once had for national newspapers and things like that? So how are you trying to tell people your story?
Well, particularly through the use of the internet. There's not a local union in the state that doesn't have a web page, that doesn't have an email trail. This last Thursday, I think it was, just before Thanksgiving, the impasse panel came down with information on what they were recommending for the state employees' contract with the state. And I must have seen it on about 35 different websites over the weekend. It showed up today as a Gangware news bulletin, that the impasse panel has come up with recommendations, and it had been out there for 4 or 5 days.
Is it harder to engage the American public in learning about the union movement nowadays? Does it seem passé to people?
I don't know if it seems passe, but a lot of people they just don't connect with. Even people who are union members and like the union, they like the benefits and things they get. But there's a sense of entitlement. It was there when they got there. They didn't have to fight for it. And there's a part of them that the whole right to work legislation appeals to. They can say, well, if I can get that for free, why should I pay for it? And the answer, Sally, is you don't get it for free. You got to pay for it because anything that the union has negotiated or fought for, once people stop being members, they'll use as an opportunity to pull back and not give them as much.
Is Michigan having problems beyond other states right now? I mean, I'm shocked that we so quickly went from being the state that I mean, we were the birthplace of the automobile union here. And then we very quickly, I think really stunningly, just sort of ended up with this reversal. What's the current state of what's happening with right to work in the state and in this state? And is that happening all over the country now?
It's being threatened in other states, places where, like Michigan, you never would have thought it would have happened. Uh, there's a slow transition for two reasons. One, a lot of contracts are ongoing, and the law doesn't affect ongoing contracts. So the big three master agreement for the auto workers doesn't expire until September of 2015. So it doesn't impact those people now. Plus, the bill didn't have immediate effect, which left about 90 days for people to renegotiate and extend contracts to push out the date when it would impact.
Yeah.
So it's been, slow, I think, to have impact. But I think one of the reasons that businesses pushed right to work is they wanted to undercut the labor movement's effectiveness, particularly in politics and around the legislature.
Right.
So if the union now has to spend all of its time signing people up, selling memberships basically,
right.
That's less time for them to do the rest of their job, including organizing or servicing a contract or legislative and political activity.
And the big legal issue is whether corporations will have to give you the money directly out of the paycheck.
That's one of them. The legislature's done a lot of things anti-union over the past couple of years. And most of them, the reason they do it is because it puts money in their pocket. I've gone through and checked over just the first couple of years of the Snyder administration and come up with a flyer that just shows the dollar impact on different people. And it comes to when you add in 1,500 wage differences for right to work, it's about $19,000. And it kind of creeps up. You don't recognize it happening unless you're laid off. We used to get 26 weeks of unemployment benefits. Michigan is one of a handful of states that now just give 20 weeks. The average unemployment benefit's about $300 a week. So take away 6 weeks of that, that's $1,800 that you don't have anymore. And these are people who don't have jobs. But if we have extended federal benefits, how much you get is dependent on how much you get from the state. We're 23% less, so we have 23% less federal benefits. The worker comp law was changed so that employers can say you may be injured and off work, but we think you should be able to find a job that pays $10 an hour, so we're going to deduct that from your benefits. Now that's going to be litigated, but it'll make it almost voluntary for employers to pay worker compensation benefits because they can just hire some type of voc rehab person to say, I think he could find a job, running a lathe, and even if there aren't jobs available. It's kind of imaginary wages that they try to impute.
It really bothers me that you're forced into this situation of always facing sort of rearguard actions, trying to protect your flank, going to court, trying to get back rights that are being eroded, chipped away, constantly under assault. It makes it harder to articulate a really positive view of the future. Here's where we'd like to go. We'd like to get the minimum wage in Michigan up to $15 an hour for fast food workers first, and then for everybody else. And I mean, it seems it's hard because you're constantly beleaguered with just trying to hang on to what you've got.
Well, I mean, the simple answer is you have to win more elections. We've got right now a Republican House, Republican Senate, and Republican governor. Now, we've had Republicans who have supported the labor movement, but on the issues that I've listed here that add up to all those financial takeaways, 98% of the Democrats voted right from our perspective on this. 97% of the Republicans voted wrong. So it's really a partisan-driven agenda.
It's clearly partisan.
And most of it's about money. It's not was just philosophy. They'd say, you can have it.
Right, but it is
But,
about money.
there was a huge tax shift that didn't get nearly the coverage I thought it would get in the press. Um, when Governor Snyder first got elected, he got through a package that raised taxes on individuals through a variety of ways. Not one big, huge thing like raising the income tax, but
Right.
kind of nibbled to death by ducks phenomena where you get a tax on pensions, income tax changes, about homestead property taxes, eliminating the ability of deducting your children on your taxes under state law,
Yeah.
cuts to the earned income tax credit, which was benefits to the
Brutal.
working poor.
Brutal.
All kinds of different tax deductions that a lot of middle-class families had, like giving monies to homeless shelters or food banks, colleges, libraries, public broadcasting, things like that, vehicle donation. And then there's been a lot of increased co-payments for particularly public employees with regard to things like health benefits or retirement health care. And they're a lot of money. And I think the key to the next election is going to be whether people understand why they don't have as much as they used to and who supported it.
Yeah, I'm poor, definitely. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ, here in Lansing, Michigan.
I want to ask Valerie from a historian's point of view. This is a tougher question, I think, because say 50 years from now, how does someone write this story? And will someone? I mean, you take a look at maybe the history of Walter Reuther and Jimmy Hoffa and Governor Frank Murphy, who was very pro-labor. How does a historian approach this? Or do you think they'll even bother 50 years from now? Or will this just be an asterisk?
I think it will be something that will be discussed because labor unions had such an impact on Michigan in the 20th century. Of course, a lot of it was the rise of auto culture, but if you look at cities like Flint and Lansing and Detroit, blue-collar factory towns largely, you cannot discuss the history of that city in the 20th century and the history of their workforce without discussing it. The question is, will it be approached simply as this is another one of those trends that builds and peaks and falls, or will it be seen as something consistent? And I think how it will be written about, part of that will depend on what the moment is right then, because you cannot remove yourself from your current circumstances to view history any other way. You always look through yesterday through the lens of today. So if the labor movement has continued to decrease and it is not as influential in the state, people will look at it as this was a movement for this time, for this workforce. If the labor movement picks back up and there is more support and increasing numbers of union leaders, I think that it will be seen as this was a low period perhaps, but we're back up to where we were.
I think the record is going to be jeopardized by something that I experienced personally. I tried to get into the Capitol during that protest a couple days before the big protest on Monday. It was on the Thursday time of the vote. And they closed the Capitol for, what was maybe the second or the first time in history. And I was one of the people with press credentials who should have been allowed in and was not allowed in. And the ACLU was kind enough to work with me to make me a plaintiff in a court case to try to find out exactly how that happened and how it could never happen again, because that seems to me to be a pretty clear violation of First Amendment rights. There certainly were no real fire code issues. Certainly in 100 years there had been other opportunities if that had been the case. And what now has happened is that the governor has succeeded in moving the Ingham County Court, moving those cases over to an appeals court that he thinks maybe, I suspect he did it because he thinks it may be more likely to rule in his favor, and we may never find out. And we're not going to, one of the things that discovery would have done in our case would have been to have given us the emails that the governor had. He said he played no part in that shutdown, that it was made as a call by the state police. I'd like to know. I'd like to see the history of the emails and the telephone calls among all the officials as they decided to do something that dramatic. That struck me as the kind of thing that harkens back to the old 30s.
Well, what's interesting about that is emails, as you know, aren't as easy to get as letters are to write history.
Right.
I mean, you're not going to be able to write the same kind of history you could have.
And if there's one guy who knows how to wipe a hard drive.
I mean, you're just not going to have the historical record. But one of the things I thought of that day when I was out there, and I'd been to a lot of demonstrations with lots of police in the 60s that got very problematic, let's say. But I can't remember so many police ever at a demonstration.
It was, yeah.
I would agree.
I was like
it was
shocked.
The cars lining the street and back, Stunning. First time ever I have seen vehicles that were patrol cars that say Homeland Security on the side. Who knew Homeland Security had its own patrol car fleet?
I did because I got stopped by one. I was down when there was before a demonstration at all. I was down and I took a photo of the Capitol and a guy pulled in front of me.
Oh,
He came up and asked me what I was doing. I was like, "Excuse me?" I could have been a tourist. I mean, it was on a Saturday morning. Homeland Security.
I actually
Whoa.
emailed a lot of pictures from inside the Capitol. I was working on the legislation when they said it was overcrowded. And it wasn't. I mean, it was just wide open. So I emailed all these pictures back to the AFL-CIO, who gave them to our attorney, took them out to the courthouse to get the injunction to open the Capitol back up. But they were saying, well, it was wall to wall inside, and it was less people in there than there is on a normal business day.
right. Let alone during some of the Vagina Gate stuff. They were wall to wall during that. I mean,
I think what happened, there was a group of people that tried to rush the Senate floor, and it was a kind of a militaristic response. Let's shut them down, throw them out. And
we're seeing a militarization of the police. I trained police for 9 years, and I can tell you, I was part of the community policing movement. We lost. RoboCop took over, and that's what we're facing in the future when you're going to try to have some of these protests. But one of the things that concerns me about the partisan divide is that it's sort of under the headline. I would put it under the headline, with friends like these. I remember when Clinton came in and signed NAFTA. I remember when Clinton allowed Tony Quello to go to all the corporations and say, just throw a little money in our pot and we won't listen to those union people as closely anymore. We'll be more corporate friendly than we are. I think what we've seen is a change where the Democratic Party is not as pro-union as it once was. It seems to be far more pro-corporate than it was. So we really have one corporate party with two wings.
I think it's been like that with regard to things like trade policy.
Yeah.
For instance, the issues I just talked about, it's one-sided, I think, as it has ever been. The thing that's changed, though, there was a period of time when John Engler was governor, and there was a Republican House and a Republican Senate, and they didn't dream of doing the things that this legislature has done.
Right.
I remember they used to ask Engler, would you sign a right-to-work bill if it got to your desk? He'd just say, not going to happen, and walk away.
Right.
So their margins were smaller, and there were some moderate Republicans. You could find, if they had a 5-vote margin, you could find 6 Republicans to not vote for the bill. Now you go to the Senate, my God, it's 26-12 Republican, and their biggest concern on partisan stuff is they're not partisan enough that they might get, a primary challenge. I had one legislator, I'll leave him anonymous, but when the time came for right to work, I'm telling him this is bad policy, and he finally goes, I don't disagree. I've told the leadership I don't want you to take it up. But Dick DeVos gave him a call and said, if you vote for this and you get trouble from the labor movement, I'll be there to protect you. If you don't vote for it, I'm going to take that same money and use it to take you out. And that's what they're responding to now. There's huge amounts of money in politics. Elections are a lot more expensive than they ever used to be. An expensive Senate seat, when I was working for the Senate back in the 70s, would be $35,000, $50,000. Now you can hit $1 million without blinking.
That's stunning.
Yeah, for a job that pays $72,000 a year.
That's why the Koch brothers.
Does that tell you something?
Well, it tells you that they're interested in what these guys can do. And if you look at, financially, they did really well on the tax cut. They raised taxes on working families and gave the tax breaks to businesses. There's an issue on the August 14 ballot for the elimination or phasing out of the personal property tax that businesses pay on their equipment in their factories and things. You can argue about the equity of that tax, but the reality is it's going to leave a hole in the budget. And a lot of that is money lost to local governments.
And education, isn't it?
A little bit of education, but particularly for police and fire protection, because that's where local governments spend a lot of money. And so that's on the ballot in August of next year. We'll see whether people will be willing to buy it. This is one time where the business people are going to have to spend money to get a yes vote. Usually they're very good at promoting no votes. Vote no on everything.
They have everybody
They all
trained.
suck, vote no. Now they're going to have to convince people to say, vote yes, give us $400 million. And I think that's going to be a tougher sell.
I think what we've seen is that a lot of the action has moved to the state level. I don't think Obama has been particularly bold or interested. I mean, EPCO was there, the card signing opportunity for organizing. He said he was going to be pushing it, but it never happened. But what scares me at the national level is TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think if that goes through, it's game over. I mean,
It'll be very bad. We've been opposing that very, very strongly.
Tell people what that is and what it'll mean.
Oh, it's like NAFTA on steroids. It encompasses the whole Asian uh, part of the world, and it would allow a country like Japan to dump all kinds of products in this country, take away whatever restrictions or limitations there are on importation of Japanese vehicles here, but do nothing to change their restrictions on American vehicles being shipped to Japan.
Right.
And it'd be just a huge shift in profit for them. They'd, I think, be much more willing to build cars there and ship them over here because there's no downside to that.
Well, what we saw with NAFTA was that there were, Ralph Nader always argued that NAFTA would have been a good treaty if there'd been two things put in, which was you'd have to meet our labor laws and you'd have to meet our environmental protections.
Yeah.
And TPP, again, is a case where you're moving sovereignty to other countries because literally they're the ones that are going to get to dictate your laws because you cannot say we're not going to be able to, to honor this because we want to protect our workers. Too bad, that's gone.
Well, the bottom line usually is the bottom line. It's all about money.
Well,
And
capital flows internationally now at a rate of speed that's, astounding. It literally zips around the world in a moment's notice, and that's part of the difficulty that we're facing in trying to fight that. What tools do we have to fight this sort of capital flow?
well, unfortunately, the first line of defense is going to be in governmental action and politics because that's what determines if a Trans-Pacific Partnership takes effect. And with the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, that says corporations basically can spend whatever amount of money they want. Uh, that's made it easier for them to get a Congress elected that's amenable to passing these types of treaties. Later this week in the Michigan legislature, they're going to kick a bill out of committee in the House that doubles the maximum contribution to elected officials. But as they were kicking that bill out of committee, the Secretary of State was proposing to have transparency on contributions to issue ad packs, and they didn't want that. So before the bill even got taken up on the floor that morning, within about an hour gap, they amended it to change the law to say that she wouldn't be able to do that sort of administrative rule. And that's in the bill that's up in committee
That
this
looked
week.
real clumsy. And she
Yeah.
must not have felt real good about what.
Well, and you talked about the Court of Claims. When that passed the other day, two people testified in favor of it. One was Bob LeBrant, who worked at the Chamber of Commerce for about 35 years and was behind all their political planning and things as their lawyer, very smart guy. And the other was Richard McClellan, who was a very close supporter and confidant, and still is, of John England. So these guys basically said we've lost in the Ingham County courts too often. And
Let's roll the dice somewhere
and they
else.
did it in as a minimal amount of legislative consideration as possible. The bill was introduced on the fifth day when it was eligible to be acted. They kicked it out of committee, voted on it. Same thing in the Senate. You know, by the time newspapers realized, gee, our freedom of information requests are going to get funneled through this new process,
Oh, joy.
then they started writing editorials. By then, the bill was on the governor's desk.
Yeah. These things are all getting fast-tracked again in December. We'll see them all whiz through. There's a package of bills Thursday morning going through on industrializing and corporatizing medical marijuana in Michigan. That's another package that's going through. This is going to be a very activist December again, so we'll see how nice the weather is and whether I can get into the Capitol this time with my video camera.
There's a couple things that have contributed to this. One is term limits. There's a loss of institutional memory.
Yes.
There used to be legislators from this area, like Dave Hollister on the Social Services Subcommittee,
Lynn
Yeah.
for Taxation, Mary Brown for Insurance. They knew more about the issues than the paid lobbyists from the industry and would just rip them to shreds in committee when they tried to pull a fast one.
Yeah.
Now these same guys come into a committee where someone may be their second day on the job. All they know is what somebody handed them on a piece of paper. There's not a whole lot of institutional knowledge to fight that sort of thing.
And I'd like to say that at the same time, what we've seen is a rapid decline in the number of reporters who have the time and the freedom to cover the Capitol and stay abreast of these issues.
Well, you look what newspapers don't value them. There's a guy by the
They
name of Charlie Kane, passed away a while back.
Yeah.
Was the head of the Detroit News Lansing bureau, and they just came up to him one day and said, "You're gone. We don't value what you bring to the table. We can hire 3 kids out of J school for what we pay you."
And then you do. You lose that institutional memory and all those opportunities to be able to have seasoned reporters covering these kinds of issues that are so critical to the future. When I moved here, there were 40 people in the newsroom at LSJ. They're now down to about 6 to 8. So that just shows you the incredible decline in the numbers. Boy, thank you so much for being here. Tim Hughes of the UAW and Valerie Marvin of the Historical Society of Greater Lansing. This has been a wonderful discussion. We will see you next Monday night. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. Lansing Online News Radio. Thank you.